Thank you all for coming. I am Dr. Mark Hobb, and Department Head of Food, Nutrition, Dietetics, and Health, and I welcome you to the 42nd Annual Grace Shugart Lecture entitled Military Life, Kansas State Alum Reflects on 30-Year Career as Army Dietitian, presented by our honored guest and alumnus, retired Colonel George Dilly. Additionally, we are honored to have special guests invited and or in attendance. We have the grandson of Grace Shugart, Jeff, here in attendance. Thank you for coming, Jeff. And we're honored by members of the 1st Infantry Division and the U.S. Army Medical Command, Colonel Donald Robinson, is he here? Lieutenant Colonel Scott Schmidt, Major John Ballman, Army Surgeon, Captain Virginia Bailey, Hearing Program Manager, and Miss Danny Holliday, Division Health Promotion Officer. Thank you for coming. We also have, thank you. We also have the Dean of the College of Human Ecology, Dr. John Buckwalter, and the Executive Director of Military and Veterans Affairs at Kansas State University, Returned Lieutenant Colonel Arthur DeGroat. Thank you for coming. And would the faculty and retired faculty please stand to be recognized? I know we have many, many, many in attendance, so thank you for coming. Also, I in particular, and I think all in attendance, owe many thanks to those on the Shugart Lecture Series Planning Committee. Dr. Mary Molt. Where's Mary? There she is. Dr. Kevin Sauer. Dr. Amber Howells. Miss Erica Linshield. Where's Erica? Back in the back. And Mrs. Janet Finney. I think Janet Finney's still back at the desk manning the phones. Before we highlight Colonel Dilly's numerous accolades, I want to provide some background behind the importance of Grace Shugart and this lecture series for those of you kind of like me who may be attending for the first time. This is actually my second or third time. First time in the role as department head of the dietetics program. With my new role this past year, I took some time to learn about the history at K-State and the legacy that Ms. Shugart built in dietetics and food service management throughout her tenure. Food service management education began at Kansas State as early as 1898, when a cafeteria was opened to train domestic science students in quantity foods preparation. By 1952, students were dining in residence hall cafeterias that simultaneously served as laboratories for students enrolled in food service management and dietetics curriculum. Grace Shugart's vision continued to build world-class experiential learning opportunities, made K-State a model for the country. Furthermore, during her tenure, K-State established the nation's first coordinated undergraduate dietetics program to educate students in a generalist program. The supervised practice program that Ms. Shugart championed continues today, nearly 50 years later. Ms. Shugart served as the national president of the American Dietetics Association, now the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and would be very proud of the faculty that also served the profession in significant and influential ways. One of Ms. Shugart's passions, as I've been told, was to provide high quality and unique learning opportunities for students and faculty. A key means of accomplishing this was to invite leaders in the profession to campus to share their experiences and wisdom. Her passion is why we're all here today. That brings us to Colonel Dilly. He earned his PhD in human ecology with specialization in food service and hospitality management at K-State in 1998. Dean Carol Shanklin served as his major professor. And I learned at lunch today, there's a nickname that she picked up, but I'm not going to say, I don't feel comfortable saying what it is, but it was something we all learned. You can ask her or George afterwards what that might be. He also graduated from the Army Command and General Staff College and the National War College, where he earned a master's degree in national security strategy. He earned his master's of education from Boston University. His last active duty position was the U.S. Army Medical Command Chief Dietitian and Nutrition Program Manager. In that role, he supervised 155 active duty dietitians and was responsible for hospital nutrition services throughout the Army. Colonel Dilly also served our nation as the nutrition consultant to the Army Surgeon General, director of the board for the Military Dietetic Internship Program and as the Assistant Chief of the Army Medical Specialist Corps. In addition, he served on the Department of Defense Nutrition Committee, the Department of Defense Supplements Committee, and as the Army Medical Command representative to the Combat Rations Board. And he successfully managed to balance his work life and his family and personal life along the way. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce our 42nd Shugart Lecture presenter, retired Colonel George Dilly.
Can you hear me okay? Now, I do want to clarify one thing before I get started for the students. We weren't here in 1898 when we started these programs. That came before our time, and I actually did graduate in 1998 and not 1898. So I just wanted to make sure that you didn't confuse the two. I do have a little story about aging that's funny, and this is a true story. I have a brother-in-law who he has this weird obsession. He collects Hot Wheels cars, and we all know they're those little cars that are about 98 cents. And a few years ago, he goes out in the middle of the night, and he knows all these ladies who work at Walmart and all these stores, and they open up the crates and the boxes so that he can get the ones that are collectible. And so he'll go out, and he doesn't sleep very well, so he'll get up 2 in the morning and go out and go looking for Hot Wheels. We all think he's nuts, but that's his thing, and it's only $1 a piece, so it's not that big of a deal. That's what his wife says, at least. So a few years ago, he was out at a Walmart, and it was kind of a seedy area of town. He knows all of the Walmarts, and this group of boys came up to him and attempted to rob him. And they said, "Oh man, give me your money." And he talked them out of it. He said, "Oh, I don't have any money. I just can't come here to get Hot Wheels. You boys just need to go along." And I said to him, I said, "Paul, that must have been really quite traumatic. And he said, "No, the only traumatic part was when they called me old man." He said, "I looked around and I didn't realize they were talking to me." So I have to tell all you youngsters here, it does sneak up on you, and it wasn't long ago. We all had hair, we were all young, we were in your shoes, and the time goes by quickly, and that's what I'm going to do is just talk about my experience in the Army, and really what I want you to do is sit back and think about yourself and where you are now, and think about where you might want to be, not in a year, that's important, not 5 years, 5 years, but think about 15 or 20 years, and think about things that you value now that may get old. And let me give you an example. We grew up and we would go to the lake as much as we could and go water skiing, and we always had access to boats, and that was my dream. I wanted a boat and a lake house. I've had a boat for about 10 years. I've not used it in the last 5, and I can't wait to get back to Texas so I can get it ready to sell. Now, people they do say, "Oh, a boat is a hole in the water where you throw all your money." For me, it's not been that at all. It's been relatively inexpensive. It's not a fancy boat. It's not cost me much money. But what's happened is, over time, my priorities have changed. And even my son, who we would go out and he would tube, we would have a blast on this boat. But now he's about ready to graduate from Texas Tech, and don't hold it against him. It is a Big 12 school, so that's good. But even his priorities are changing. He can't get a group of people to go out on the boat anymore. So think about your job, the jobs that you hold dear to you right now, what you want to do, and try to think 10, 15, 20 years out how your life may change. So what you really like doing now, you might want to find something different that will fit your life then. And don't limit yourself. We were talking this morning, we went around the room and people talked about where they wanted to work in their first job, and I heard a lot of Kansas City. And what I did was I challenged the students to think maybe Washington, D.C., or New York, or California, because guess what? The same type of job that you aspire to exists there too. And it might give you an opportunity to do something different. And then if you decide that that's not where you want to be, guess what? You can always move back to any place. You can move anywhere you want to move. So I just want to point that out from the beginning. Now, let me just make sure I've got everything. I know it's one of those rules you've been taught. You don't look at the slide. But I have to tell you up front, I've not memorized all these slides, so I'm going to have to look up here. So first thing I would like to do is I would like to thank you, sir, and thank you for your family. This is the person that's most honored by this is me. I really appreciate being here. Coming back to my friends and family at K-State is really an honor.
And thank you for coming.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Dr. Shanklin, I told somebody earlier, if Dr. Shanklin is your friend, you have a friend for life, and I truly mean that. And I really appreciate everything you've done for me over the years. Kevin, my buddy Kevin, we had a lot of fun here as grad students, and we kept each other straight. And I really appreciate your friendship. And to all my K-State family and friends, you are very dear to my heart. This is a disclaimer. I don't represent the Army. I'm retired. Now, there are some things I obviously couldn't talk about that I could have talked about on active duty, and we can't talk about troop strengths, and there are a variety of things. But bottom line is, this is my experience. These are my opinions and thoughts, and it has nothing to do with the Army. Now, I know I don't want to offend anybody in here because some of you, this is very basic. You know officer ranks. For those of you who haven't been exposed to this, I put this up here because there's a real neat story that goes with this that makes it very easy to remember later. And I learned this probably 10 years ago. So when you look at the ranks, as a dietitian, you would come in as a second lieutenant. That's this butter bar, this gold bar over here. Okay, the rule is really neat. Think about the earth and think about geology. Gold bar is found where? In the earth. Gold is found below silver. So the next rank would be a silver bar, which would be a first lieutenant. Then you come to the surface of the earth, railroad tracks. That looks like a railroad track, doesn't it? Then we go above the earth. We're in the trees now. A major is an oak leaf. Gold is below silver. So the silver oak leaf is your lieutenant colonel rank. This is starting to make sense. Now you get above the trees, what do you have? You have the eagles. Some people call them chicken wings. We call that colonel, sir. So. And then you have the generals, you have the stars, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and obviously you don't see the 5 stars around anymore. Now, to put it in perspective, the Army is a competitive environment. It's an up or out system, generally. And so what that means is there are certain places along the continuum of rank where if you don't get promoted, you have to basically get out and look for employment elsewhere. So just to put it in perspective, a due course officer, for every 10 lieutenants that come in, there will only be about 1 colonel left. And then of all of the colonels out there, in general, only about 5% of them will be competitive to make general officer. So, and then, it goes on up, and obviously the president, nominates the upper generals. And it's interesting, I didn't realize, but generals, it's not uncommon for them to sign their resignation at the beginning of their tenure as a rank. So say that you're nominated and you accept 2-star, 3-star, that it's very common for them to sign their resignation letter then. And so if the situation becomes that they need to resign, they've already signed it. So that's just pulled out and they resign. So you serve at at the pleasure, at the general officer, at the president. So it's a very competitive system, but you'll see there's also a lot of autonomy, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So, and these are very simplistic. I don't want to offend anybody, but deployment, that's generally when you go into a theater of operation. Can be a combat operation, it can be a peacekeeping mission, it can be a variety of missions, but it means you're leaving your home base and you're going to do real Army stuff. PROFIS is an acronym for a system of professional fillers, and in the medical community, every hospital we have that's deployable, it isn't completely full. Now, this gentleman is a surgeon, no, a family practice doc. So we have deployable hospitals that, when they're stateside, they won't have all the family practice physicians in them that they need when they deploy. So it's called a professional filler system. What we'll do is we'll have his name on a roster, so when that unit is ready to deploy, we will reach out and say, would you like to join us to deploy? And it'll come as an order. It won't really come as a request. This is the Army, by the way. I mean, now, in the medical department, we are considered non-combatants. Now, wait a minute. You train with weapons. We are not to be used, according to the Geneva Conventions and the laws of warfare, in offensive operations. Now, what does that mean if we are in a combat support hospital and we're overrun? Guess what? You get out your M16s, your 50 cal, you have the right, you always have the right to protect yourself. You always have the right to protect your patients. So, you know, along my service, I've been in a few discussions about, well, what are the ethics? I mean, how do you feel ethically about being in the Army? You know, the Army kills people. You know, the Army does kill people. I've always steered clear of those conversations, and I've been able to go back. Look, I'm not going to discuss all of those philosophical things. I'm in the Army Medical Department. I'm technically a non-combatant, even though I'm trained to kill you right now. So, and if you keep talking to me like that, it might just happen. No, I'm just kidding. But, you know, we are trained, but in our roles as medical people, we are non-combatants. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about the Geneva Convention in a few minutes. Geneva Conventions, there's actually more than one. Long-term health education and training, this is a program that I utilized in coming to Kansas State. And what we do, the Army does it across all of the officer specialties, but in the medical department, we allow people to go back to civilian institutions to get degrees that they need in their job. It could be a master's degree, a PhD, etc. But you're never a civilian. The word, well, civilian's not even in there, but we call it civilian training. It's a program where you're fully funded to go back to school, and that's what I utilized in coming to K-State to get my PhD. I had 3 years to complete the program. Now, it's kind of odd because the national average for PhDs at the time was 6 years. So, is the Army torturing me? What's going on here? The bottom line is, it's a very intense program. They fund me, but guess what? It's my full-time job, and that's what you do. And there are a lot of different degrees you can get, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Now, how many people have heard of PT before? We're not talking physical therapy, sorry. Sometimes that happens after PT, but physical training is, you know, soldiers have to be fit. That's the bottom line. If you're in the medical department, you have to be fit. I was the chief dietitian, and guess what? I probably had to be more fit than most people because they were looking at me as a role model, you know, and so it came with the territory. So the standard for all units is you will do PT at least 3 times a week. You will be able to pass your physical fitness test, which I don't know if it's changed yet, but it was a 2-mile run, push-ups and sit-ups, and there are minimums and maximums based on, well, there's really no maximum, but there are minimums based on your age. So you do benefit a little bit. That's one of the few things that you look forward to your next birthday for. It's like, thank goodness I had a birthday. And now I don't have to do as many push-ups and sit-ups. So, but it's a given. You do it all the time. It's something that you're very proud of. You do it even if you're in a hospital, etc. You don't always do it in an organized fashion. Sometimes it's your responsibility to get up at what we call dark 30, which would be early in the morning, and you just got to make it happen. That's your personal responsibility. If you're lucky, you can do it in a unit. Sometimes that's fun, and sometimes it's not fun, but it is what it is. Now, I have to give you some style points, first of all. So the first one, we have this word, hua. It can be used as an exclamation. It can be used as a question. It can be used as a curse word sometimes. We really can't tell you what it means, but it's just part of who we are. So if I say anything you really like, you have the authority to stand up or sit there and say hua, and act like you really know what you're talking about, because that's what we do. Now to the contrary, and this is for educators. This is great, and I'll explain the logic behind this. We don't allow soldiers to fall asleep, and we just don't. If you get sleepy in the lecture, what you do is, you find yourself nodding off, you get up and you walk to the back of the room and you stand there and you wake yourself up. And it's very hard to sleep when you're standing up. So it works great. And then what happens later in the day, your classmates say, dude, what is up with you? Why don't you ever go to sleep? I mean, come on, and then they give you a hard time. And then you realize that you haven't really offended the presenter because you didn't sleep, but now that presenter knows that, you didn't find his presentation to be all that entertaining. And so it works great because let me go back to high school. In high school health class, I had a teacher who, if you fell asleep, he would shush the whole class. Shh. It would be so silent you could hear a pin drop. He would get the trash can and go over by your desk and go, wham! And you would jump out of the chair, embarrass yourself, fall down, whatever, and it was terrible. Now, did that student have any respect for that teacher after that? No, the rest of the semester, he just envisioned how he was going to get him. How am I going to get that teacher? Well, this is great because the teacher, you have to self-select. You get up, you stand in the back of the room, you've called yourself out. Now you've got peer pressure. Maybe you can go to bed a little earlier and you won't have to fall asleep in class. So it's brilliant.
Good.
A little bit about my background. Did I grow up reading Soldier of Fortune magazine and just dream about being a soldier? No, I really didn't. Now, I did grow up playing with G.I. Joe. And those were the original G.I. Joes. And I did have a neighbor who got all the best toys, and he actually had the Jeep with the big spotlight, if some of you remember. So then that was cool, and we would go out and dig forts and all of that. So that was my experience to the military as a child. We did have a tent that looked just like that, that my dad bought from Army surplus. We did camp a lot. I was very interested in lifting weights. I loved playing basketball. I was a cyclist, rode for many, many years. Does anybody remember the ABA? Does that ring a bell? American Basketball Association. It was a league that existed simultaneously with the NBA that had the best stars. Dr. J, Artis Gilmore, Louis Dampier. Anyway, the Kentucky Colonels, we had a basketball team in Louisville. And I did go to the University of Louisville. So that's my background. My father worked at Fort Knox. He worked for the Army as he worked in a medical research lab. He was an electronic technician. He built all the gizmos they used for doing research, and he worked in TV production. And as I was saying earlier, my experience with the medical research lab, I toured it once, and we went downstairs where they had monkeys, and one of the monkeys grabbed my shirt, grabbed me by the collar, and scared the heck out of me. And I never went back. And so that was it. I knew my dad drove off to Fort Knox every day, and he came home and they had carpools. But I didn't know any, and I was a normal college kid, you know, did some stupid things, but none of them were too stupid, and got through school. And so how did I become a soldier? Well, back then, dietitians are, at the time, and now for the most part, are required to do internships that qualify them to take the National Registry exam to become a dietitian. And, you know, some people use this big matrix where they have all these criteria and location, clinical specialty, you know, hours, are there graduate hours, and so forth. Did I have a matrix like that? No, I looked at one column, and it was the column that said stipend. And, and I was tired of being a poor college student, so there were two of them that had a stipend that I couldn't believe. It looked more like salary, and it was. It was a salary for a second lieutenant. So I said, I'm not going to apply to any of those that don't give me any money. You know, I do have to eat and live someplace, so forget them. So I applied for the Army and the Air Force, and I was accepted into the Army internship. Okay, now what does that mean? I'm going to be a second lieutenant. Okay, and then I read up a little bit, and, you know, and they say, don't worry about it. We'll teach you how to wear the uniform. You'll figure it out, you know, and so I did. So I go to, what is the main picture you see in your mind when you think of basic training? Anyone?
Push-ups.
Push-ups. And who's over you yelling and screaming? Drill sergeant, that guy with that funny looking hat, right? Guess what? Army Medical Department basic is not like that. They teach you how to be there's a lot of classroom instruction, and there is field training, of course. You have to be able to conduct yourself in the field. You do have to qualify with 9mm, M16. I've had the fortune of qualifying with a 50 cal, which was fun. And like I was saying earlier, it's really not a discriminatory environment. We want people to succeed. You know, if you get accepted into the dietetic internship or some of the other programs that I'll mention in a few minutes, we expect you to succeed. We're not there to pick people out and make them fail. That would make no sense because we invest a lot of money. So you learn a lot that you normally might not find yourself interested in. Now, how many females in here are familiar with and already comfortable with using weapons? How many would like to be? It looks like about the same amount of hands. No. But the point is, these are opportunities that you don't think about, but once you get them, you say, this is really cool. And this has been a lot of fun. For example, in the basic course, I assume now, up until a year or so ago, they did combatives. And it didn't matter if you were a male or a female. This is medical basic. And they give you these big sticks with big pillows on the end, basically. And you learn how to defend yourself. And one of the dietitians that I knew won in, I think it was an advanced course, she won the combatives for the females. And I can't use the same terms I used at lunch because I'm being recorded and this is being broadcast, but she's a bad young lady, you know? And how many young ladies wouldn't want to be a bad young lady? It's nice to be. You can still, you know, you don't have to let people know you're the combatives champion. But the point is, it's an environment where you learn a lot of things that you may have never been exposed to, but once you do it, it's fun, it's exciting, and it's pretty cool. And you know what? Any dirt you get on you, guess what? It comes off in the shower. It's not that big of a deal. Going to the field, we all take showers. So I did Officer Basic. My internship was at Walter Reed in D.C. Now, the way it worked was they allowed us to choose. We had two at the time. One was in San Antonio and one was in D.C. And I thought, San Antonio sounds kind of like a neat place. So I think I'll pick San Antonio. Well, the Army picked Washington, D.C. So it worked out great. It was a 9-month program, and I got there and I realized that, you know, first of all, any of those programs, you're always a little scared. I mean, when you went to medical school, when you went in the first day, were you a little antsy about that? Like, you know, I'm here with a lot of smart people. I know I'm smart, but how am I going to measure up? We all do that. Guess what? I did fine. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my peers. I learned a lot. It was a great experience. Living in D.C. was a lot of fun. This is the Army dietetic internship today. It's a combined master's program. The degree is granted by Baylor University, master's in nutrition. And you go in with the rank of second lieutenant. And this is not a recruiting pitch. I'll tell you that up front. I'm not here as a recruiter. I'm here just to give you information and give you some perspective on what this means. And the pay might even, it might vary a little bit depending on location. But it's about $50,000 a year as a student. So, there aren't a lot of places you can go and get a master's degree and complete your internship and get paid like that. Now, I will tell you, if you live in, guess what? Well, you'll be in San Antonio for the first part of that. So it's pretty cheap there. It's not, that money goes pretty far. The focus areas you can see, military leadership, what does that mean? That's just leadership with the word military put in front of it. I mean, it's the same principles of leadership, but how to apply them in a military environment, how to be successful as an officer. And we had a discussion this morning, one of the students, and I really appreciated this comment. She said, where I've lived, I've interacted and I've seen some of the press about soldiers, and they don't always act like the most mature individuals in the neighborhood. And guess what? A lot of them don't. But as an officer, you will. There's an expectation that you will, and if you're selected for the program, you're the right fit, 99% of the time. So it's the leadership part, it just comes and, you'll do well in that. Research, you do produce research in this master's program, and clinical excellence across the spectrum, which would include inpatient, outpatient, health promotion, performance nutrition, all of those. 20 months program, 20 month. Does 9 and 12 equal 20?
Do it.
I'm from Kentucky and I can say maybe it does. But anyway, it's about, give or take. It's funny because I was at a briefing by the Chief of Staff of the Army one time, and he was talking about, the Army's been a zero defects organization for many years, and we're getting away from that. And, he was trying to convince us that we needed to be able to make mistakes and fail, and he had his slides all mixed up. And he went to the next slide, and it's like, that's not the right slide. And then he went to the next, and he said, we'll figure that out. And he had his aide, he said, will you get me on the right slide? And he got it squared away. And I looked at that, and I thought, very smart. That was obviously done by design, because the Chief of Staff of the Army, if he goes out and presents and his slides are messed up, that aide is in trouble. Talk about doing some push-ups. But Anyway, 9 and 12 is not 20. Masters in San Antonio. The internship sites, there are 3, San Antonio, Washington, D.C., or Seattle, Washington. So, and you do have some input into where you go, but we have to decide for the best needs of the Army. If everyone wants to go to Seattle, guess what? Everyone wouldn't go to Seattle. We would have to spread them out. Now, the way we design this is very interesting, because the reason we went to the master's program was, say that you're in a year group, and we call a year group, say that the year you came in, there were 10 dietitians that came in. We only had the ability to send 1 or 2 to get a master's every year. So if you think about that, okay, over a 3-year period, we have 30 dietitians, and we can only send 6 to get a master's. How do we ever catch up? We couldn't catch up. And so in the old days, they would say, well, you just need to get a master's. Well, getting a master's from Podunk University in basket weaving is not going to help you clinically. It's not going to make you, I mean, it might make you a better leader if it's a real good course, but it's not really going to help a whole lot. So we had to redesign that model. So what we said was, let's front load the masters so everybody has that skill set, that advanced skill set, so that they're ready to take care of soldiers and their family members, and they truly enter as advanced entry-level dietitians. And it's a great idea. Now what we did was we designed the program so the master stands alone. So I come out here and I'll just make you a dietitian. You're already a dietitian and you've been practicing for a couple of years and you don't like where you're working and you remember this lecture and so you decide you want to go in the Army. And you get in touch with the medical recruiter. Don't go to just any recruiter. They don't know the medical programs. So if you have any interest in medical programs, you have to find the medical recruiter. So you find the medical recruiter, I'll say it's Captain Smith, and you say, Captain Smith, I want to go in the Army. And Captain Smith says, well, let me check. I don't know if we're taking fully qualified applicants right now, because most of the time they come through the internship. But Captain Smith checks, and it would have been he was checking with me a few years ago, and I would say, sure, Captain Smith, we'll take one. And so what you would do if you got selected for the course is you would come in and you could go directly to the masters, you could complete the masters, and then go out to your first work site and complete your research. So you could do the masters, or we'll look at it a different way. You get in and you're already a dietitian in the Army and you don't have a master's. And this happened when we started talking about the master's program. It was like, what about me? I've been in the Army for 7 years and I don't have a master's. Why would you offer it to someone who's just coming in, who's never worked as a dietitian, when I don't have a master's? How about training me first? We could never make that work out. We didn't have the ability. So you come to me and you say, what about me? I want a master's. You're a captain. You've been in for 5 years. You can apply and you can go through the same program. So we made it so it has 3 levels of entry, and it's worked out really, really well. And I do have to say we have other partnerships with Baylor that have been very productive. We have a Doctor of Physical Therapy program. We have an OT Doctor of Science program and a PA Emergency Medicine Doctor of Science program. And the last 2, the OT and the PA, are terminal degrees. They're not entry-level degrees. They're not qualifying degrees. That's after you've been practicing for a while. They would have masters, and then they would do those degrees. So, but this has worked out really well for us. Now, at some point in the Army, when I came in the Army, I was just going to stay for 3 years and get out. And then I was going to figure something else out because I had no career aspirations. At some point, I had to make a decision. Do I want this to be a career or do I want to get out? And that happened at about year 2 or 3. I decided that I liked it. I wanted to stay. It was a good fit. I'd played with my G.I. Joes. I knew how that worked. I'd slept in Army tents and no, I'm just kidding. But there is a decision point, and the Army is not for everybody. Some of the interns that came in with me decided not to stay. Most of them, well, with the exception of the one girl who fell asleep sitting next to the Surgeon General, 3-star general, when he was briefing us. The rest of the folks over time, they got out because of mainly family conflicts, not like turmoil in the family, but they had decided to have families and they just thought that it would work out better for their family if they got out. Very rarely did dietitians leave because they just hated it. All the people were terrible. There's none of that, or very little of that disgruntled behavior. And some people, after being deployed to Iraq, especially the ones who were deployed at the time for 15 months, and that was a long time. A lot changes in 15 months. But some of them decided that if they had to do that regularly, it wasn't in the best interest of their family, and they got out. And, I respect that. That makes sense. You would be nuts to say, yeah, I want to do this, and then just let your family, the chips fall where they may, because it probably wouldn't work out well for you. Career progression, I showed you the rank, so that's the rank as you go up in rank. But Army dietitians, for those of you who are going to be dietitians, we usually start out in outpatient. We do clinical, and you may go from clinical job. Clinical is inpatient, outpatient, inpatient. We still do production and service, food service operations. And then what you try to do is you try to stage it so you can become the director of food service at a smaller hospital. We have, I think it's still 25 hospitals. And so, in my case, it worked out great. My first assignment, and I'll show you, this will make a little more sense in a second, but I had 3 jobs in the first assignment, and I went from outpatient to inpatient to chief of production and service, food service operations. So it was logical that the next step was as the director of food service somewhere. And luckily, it worked out great, and I got to go to Belgium for 3.5 years. So here are my assignments. Texas was basic course, Washington, D.C., internship, Missouri, I just mentioned that, Belgium, chief of nutrition. And it was very interesting. I had all of my KP staff were Belgian nationals, and they all reported, they were under a 1-star general over in the SHAPE headquarters, which was Belgian. But they worked for me. They worked for me, but they didn't really report to me. It was kind of an interesting arrangement. And then I did have soldiers there too. But it was so much fun being in Belgium, because I mentioned, there's structure, but there's also autonomy. And I was talking to my wife the other day, and I said, okay, what did you like about all of being in the Army and being an Army family? And those were her words. She said, there was structure, but yet there was autonomy. There was structure when you move to Belgium. It's not like you're moving to a foreign country and you're lost and you don't know what to do. You're able to get settled and get in a house and get into your job. And then there's autonomy where I don't work every day. There are weekends. I get to travel to Germany. I can go on vacations. There's a lot I can do. There's also job autonomy. As the chief or the director, as long as I met my budget and provided good service, I could be as creative as I wanted to. And I mentioned to the group earlier that we had filet mignon and lobsters for the new moms on the OB ward. We didn't deliver very many babies, and we treated them very, very well, because guess what? It was a special occasion. We even brought their husbands in. We had a room set up, candlelight, and I mean, is that a manly thing to say? Yeah, I gave them. I don't care. It was right for that couple. It was the right thing to do in that job, and it was very appreciated. Did it break the budget? No, it didn't. It was very affordable, and it was very rewarding to do those types of things. So I came back to Texas for some military training. Now, along with your education, your civilian education, we do military training, and we do it at different stages in our career. I mentioned basic course, the advanced course. That's what this was. It was a 6-month course for senior lieutenants and captains. And you're with your peers, your medical peers, and you do a lot of the same training, but it's just at a higher level. Colorado, first I was in the 4th Infantry Division as the division nutritionist. Worked for division headquarters, which was a blast. We had a lot of fun. Except doing PT in the mornings on the icy streets. That was not much fun. And then from that job, I moved over to the director of nutrition services at the hospital there, which was a bigger job, more employees. Military training came up again. Command and General Staff 1 year at Fort Leavenworth. That was a school that you had to be selected for, and I was luckily enough I was selected for that. From Leavenworth, I went to K-State, came to K-State, 3 more years. Back to Texas, I had 2 jobs at Brooke Army Medical Center. I went to Bosnia, deployed to Bosnia. I left that out. That was important. And it was a lot of fun, too. I'll talk more about it in a few minutes. We really had fun. Washington, D.C., back for National War College, which was, it's a master's program in national security strategy. And this was different peers. In that group of 211 students, over 50% of them become general officers. Many of them are 3 and 4 stars now. And so it's a group of really smart folks. And once again, before you get there, you get a little nervous, and it's like, I'm a dietitian, you know. Do I have what it takes? And the answer is absolutely. I did very well there, really enjoyed it. I'll talk a little bit more about the details in a second. Then I went back to San Antonio, and I was able to work a deal where I would go back and take a job that nobody else wanted. It was a very important job, but it was also a difficult job. So my corps chief said, yes, when I go to Washington, I can come back to San Antonio. So I left my family in San Antonio. So it worked out great because we had bought a house like right here. And then we kept that house until after retirement. So that doesn't always happen for Army families, but it does help when you can get equity in a home. Back to Texas for 4 different jobs, and then I retired. And that equals 30 years. Now, you will see that there's a lot of school in that. And the military really wants people to be well trained in a lot of areas. And so if you count up the years, I see 5 right off the bat that I was a full-time student. So that's a lot of opportunity. And you have to compete for some of those. They don't give them away, but if you play your cards right, it is, you know, there is a chance you can go. So. Now, I mentioned PROFIS a few minutes ago. When you're assigned to stateside hospitals as a medical professional, usually you're also on a line somewhere, you're in the inventory of a deployable hospital. So those were the ones that I was PROFIS to. I wasn't PROFIS to the 96 because that was actually the hospital. It was a forward deployed hospital in Belgium. So you have 2 roles. So when they get up and go someplace, or when they train, you get a call, hey, we need the dietitian out here. Okay, no problem. And you may have a clinical role, or you might go out, in my case, as the chief of food service in a field hospital where you're cooking out in the field with field equipment and, you know, feeding troops that are training and so forth. It's fun. I mentioned 4th ID. That was a blast. What I did was I provided all the clinical care, the nutrition clinical care to soldiers in 4ID. So instead of going to the hospital, they came to see me in the division. So, and then I could refer them if it was something that, was beyond my scope. I also managed the Army weight control program for the division, and I supervised at the time, and I guess we still do, we did tape tests to determine body fat. I supervised all of the tape testing for the entire division. And it worked out well because that's something that, for the most part, in the division, they see as a headache. You have first sergeants doing that. And, I mean, it's better if you have one medical person who can oversee the whole project. And what I would do was I would never get on the wrong side of first sergeants. If there was ever a discrepancy or a question about, the taping of a soldier, I would just have the first sergeant come in, or whoever he had that did the taping, and I would just verify that everything was done correctly. And that was a real nice way to do it because I didn't offend anybody. If I did it myself and got a different number, then they would be offended. It's like, that wouldn't be appropriate. But long story short was that worked really well. And it was appreciated by the guys in the division because they didn't have to do it anymore. And sometimes that's okay. If you take a task that really should fall under you that somebody else has been doing and you can assist them by doing it, why not? I had many opportunities to be involved in my professional organization, and I took them when I could in Missouri. And this was one of those things where nobody wanted to do it. So I'll do it. What the heck? It was a small organization. Basically what we provided was monthly continuing ed, and I could coordinate that. That was no big deal. Because I was the president of the region, it also made me a member on the state board, which was interesting. And it also helped with networking later. The president of ADA, at one point, of the American Dietetic Association, it's now the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, was a friend of mine on the board. So I made contacts that I had no idea I would ever run across it again. That was in Missouri in 1984 that 15 years later I knew. The same thing in Europe. We had a professional organization over there that I volunteered for. Now, I mentioned the advanced course and CGSC and command no, I didn't mention CAST-CUBE, Combined Arms and Services Staff School. That was another school that we went to. It was about 12 weeks military training. So it's all progressive. It all made sense. You go to one school and you interact with certain professionals, and then you go to the next level a few years later, and now you're planning. The strategy is at a higher level. Maybe you were at a division level, now you're a corps level, which is generally 3 to 5 divisions. And when I say division, it's like an infantry division, like the big red one. These were my graduate school opportunities. The internship at the time had 6 hours of graduate credit. When I was in Belgium, I completed a master's at night. At that time, you don't make major without a master's. Everybody had them, so if you're the one who didn't have a master's, guess what? You weren't going to make it. So, that was a 36-month program I did. I think I took about 20 months. It just worked out that way. And it was a great program. What Boston University did was they took their full professors from Boston and said, would anyone like to go to Europe for 3 years? And they had housing for them, and they had all of the coursework was already set up for the most part. So I'm sure the hands went up pretty quickly in Boston for that. So great program, really enjoyed it. And at the time, the Army still has the program. It was called tuition assistance, where they paid for 75% of it. So it was a good deal for everybody. Kansas State. Bosnia, I went in 2000, and I went let me back up just a second. That's Bosnia. And I would dare say most people couldn't find it on a map. And that's not a criticism, because why would you know where Bosnia is? It's not a country that we have that much knowledge of. So we were located at Eagle Base. That was the main hospital there. And that's how it looked. It was very interesting and very sad, because you would see communities that had lived together basically since the end of World War II, that were multicultural, and now you would see them after mid-90s, where one house, maybe the Muslim house in the neighborhood, was blown up and the family was killed or displaced. And then you would fly over and see another area where maybe the Serbs or the Croats, because of nationalist trends, they turned on each other. And we were there. It was a peacekeeping mission at that time. Another situation where I deployed with the 115th Field Hospital out of Fort Polk, Louisiana. I'd never been there before, and when I got there, all the things that people said about Fort Polk, it was worse than what they said. It was out in the middle of nowhere. There wasn't much of support for the families there. So not from a military perspective, but the economy didn't have much. What happened was, we were organizing, getting ready to deploy, and there was they didn't really have anyone in charge of lab and pharmacy. They needed somebody to take charge of that, and because of my PhD, it gave me the qualifications to do a hospital administration job. So I said, I'll do that. So I became the deputy commander for administration, which included all of those services. And one I didn't put up there was, I also was the fire marshal in the huts. And we had buildings that were made of wood. And the base fire marshal would come through, and I would have to go with them. And I would have to go back and tell all the docs or whoever that we had in our unit that you can't daisy chain 6 extension cords together. That is a fire hazard, and they would get mad at me, but they would get over it, because we'd go have dinner at the chow hall and it would be over. But a lot of the, the duties and these responsibilities, I could have said, I'm a dietitian, I'm not doing that, but I loved it. I had so much fun. And what I was able to do while I was there was, we needed some more space. We needed a building for PT, physical therapy, not for physical training. For physical therapy, they didn't have a clinic. They had no patient privacy. And so I was responsible for making the case, getting with the architect, designing and getting funding to build a clinic. And we were very successful. And it kind of went like this. We would go into this big group, and we had to compete with mayors of the different camps around there. And the mayor was in charge of facilities at each camp. Well, I went in, and this mayor says, we need a copy machine. We don't have a copy machine in headquarters, and we've got, it'll be about $10,000. No copy machine. I need a building for physical therapy. It's about $105,000. Here are the plans. This is what it can do for the community. And I was like, good. I felt sorry for the guy that didn't get the copy machine, but we did our homework, and we were able to, build a new ward, an expansion ward, and a PT clinic. And why can I do that? Why do I have the skills as a dietitian? Because guess what? We study design. If you can design a kitchen, you can take those same principles and apply them to other facilities, and you use the subject matter experts, and it works quite well. This was interesting. Now, I bought this at the Russian store on Camp Uglevik, which was in the Russian sector. And I don't know, can you tell who that face is? No political statements here, but that's Monica Lewinsky. I thought that was hilarious, and I still have that candy bar. I bought 2, and I ate 1, and then I took that home. It's probably a classic. I could probably sell it on eBay for a few bucks. But Russians, Norwegians, Poles, Brits, of course. It was multinational. And we would go to the different sectors for different events. We went to the Russian sector for the anniversary of the Russian airborne soldier, which was a wild event that involved a lot of vodka, which we could not drink, and guys jumping out of planes, hitting lots of things around, and then breaking pickle jars over their heads with live frogs and eating the frogs. So it was a real cultural experience. National War College, I'll just tell you a little bit about that. Now, Senior Service College encompasses National War College, Army War College, Navy War College, Air War College, and so there are different services. This one is for a variety of services and State Department, etc. I'll show you. So Armed Services, State Department, a variety of civilian agencies, some of them that would have to kill me if they told me where they were from. CIA, NSA, FBI, I think that, and then we had international officers too. Master of Science, 55 hours in 11 months. Now, when you go to these military schools, people who have been before, they always tell you, you're going to really enjoy that. That's a gentleman's course. You'll be on the golf course, you know, more than you'll be in class, and it's going to be a good break for you. I don't know about you, but I've never been to a gentleman's course yet. They didn't exist and they may have existed a few years ago, but 55 hours and 11 months. On average, it was 110 pages of reading every night. And it wasn't reading only if you did it. It was reading you had to do. And there was a saying, it's reading only if you do it. Well, guess what? That didn't work well because you had to sit in groups of 16. And these were some of the smartest guys in the Army in all of these services. So, and you're representing your own service, the Army Medical Department, so you don't want to not do your reading. You would look rather foolish, but it was a great opportunity. We had access to lawmakers. I had a course on media relations, and we had a reporter, I won't mention his name, but very famous from the New York Times, that sat at the head of the table and told us what was going to be on the front page of the New York Times the next morning. And that's, in his world, that's like top secret, you know. We would have to have a secret clearance for that. But just that level of detail. Lawmakers, we had junior congressmen, and this really stuck out in my mind. I had one that said, this is my life. I spend 50% of my week, every week, on the phone, asking for donations so I can run a campaign in 2 years. Because if I don't do that, I won't have enough money to compete. I never thought about that. You know, they have 2-year terms, and that's the state. And he said, guess what? If you're not in the Congress for 7 to 10 years, you don't get any of the plum committee assignments. So very interesting. We had a focus area. Mine was Israel and Palestine. We had a 3-week study abroad, which I was unable to do because of security concerns. Our group, we did go to the EU in Brussels, United Nations High Commission on Refugees in Geneva, U.S. Embassy, and the Grand Mosque in Paris. We also met with the government officials that were in charge of assimilation of different religions and cultures into France, which was fascinating. You know, some of the issues they had. And I was also the desk officer for Iran for the whole year. So I always had to study about Iran, and I had to know what was going on in case there was any discussion, they would come to me, and I had to give the latest. These are non-traditional positions that I had the opportunity of serving in. The Army Medical Specialist Corps force structure, that's where you decide how many people you get. It's very competitive, and it's unlike other organizations. The number of people in the Army is determined by Congress. It's an exact number. So say that we used to have 3,437 physicians or something like that. If we want more physicians, we have to have a bill payer. Somebody has to donate their, like say that you're in charge of nursing, for example. He wants 100 more physicians. He might have to take them from you. So now you have 100 positions that are gone. How are you going to fill those? Are you going to have to get civilians? And so it was a job where you guard the number of people you have and you protect it. Sometimes you grow it and sometimes you negotiate to change it. But it's a very interesting world. Deputy Chief to the Army Medical Specialist Corps. My last job was I was loaned executive to the United Way in San Antonio for 6 months, and I worked on the Combined Federal Campaign, which is our donation campaign, and I managed a lot of big accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars for the medical, well, all of the bases in San Antonio. I was one. It was really very interesting and informative. These are some of the projects that we had that were ongoing. I mentioned some of them. The last one, we just had to realign the pay for the PAs when they finished their entry-level course. It was different from the Army than it was from the Air Force, and it made no sense to anyone, and it had been that way for many years, and the law said that it needed to be the same, so we changed that. And the reason I mention that is that's not something you would normally find, you would think a dietitian would do. But in the Corps Chief's office, we served all of the specialties, PA, OT, PT, and the dietitian. So you worked collaboratively, you worked for everyone that you served. A few years ago, we started educators tours where we brought faculty members from around the country to San Antonio to view how we trained and to meet people who were in our training programs. They were very successful, a lot of fun, very eye-opening. We also had wounded warriors meet with the groups and talk about their experience getting care, and they were very candid. It was special, especially for the OTs and PTs, because it was so meaningful to them because they could relate exactly and tell stories about how the OT and the PT had really helped them. And I remember one gentleman specifically. It was so heartwarming because he was traumatically injured. This just gives you an idea as the chief dietitian. This was mentioned in the intro, but I talked about career progression, and I mentioned that if you envision your career as being an outpatient dietitian or a clinical dietitian, if you think you might want to do things that are much more global, you will have the skill set to do that. You just have to make sure you don't limit yourself, because that's the limitation. It's not what you can do, it's what you think you can do. And I would encourage all of the students in here to think very, very broadly. You will see that some of these, some of the things like designing, we were responsible for the design of 7 new hospitals in my office. Now I had a team of 2 or 3 people who would go out, and I'll tell you that the design of food service operations is not intuitive. If you don't have some experience, you'll miss things. Like, guess what? You need a space to put dishes in a dish room. They get stored there, the clean ones and the dirty ones. You know, so people who don't have the experience, they don't necessarily know these things. Director of the board for the military dietetic internship, member on defense committees which were instrumental in protecting the safety of soldiers, especially the supplements committee. The Combat Rations Board, they're the group that designed the MREs, and I was responsible for approving the menus for all of the MREs. So they would send them to me, and I had to look through and make changes to them or recommendations. And they're a great group. They're tremendous scientists. It's a cool, I read an article recently that highlighted all of the changes you see on the market in foods that came out of that office. Potato chip bags and all kinds of foods that we eat on a regular basis that come from their research, not only on the food itself, but on the packaging. They're experts in packaging, world-renowned. Nutrition policy came out of our office, both clinical policy and anything that had to do with nutrition. Our computer system, which ran all of the kitchens throughout DOD in the hospitals, I was the proponent for that. And I'll tell a real quick story. I got a call one time. I had a gentleman that worked in the Pentagon that managed that program. He did all the education. He said, "Colonel Dilly, you got a problem. You got to help me." Okay, what's the problem? They've cut all the funding for these computer systems, and it's going to shut down in X number of weeks. We had no redundant system. Guess what? All of our recipes are tied. All of our commodities, all of the food coming in, the recipes, and all the diets for clinicians are all tied to this system. And so through a period of negotiations, I had to get them to put us back in the budget. That was done at a level that it was very complicated. And they just thought, that's probably not important. They probably can do that stubby pencil. They did it before. They don't really need computers. So I'm glad we saved that one. Otherwise, we would have had no way. Those of you who are dietitians who have worked in quantity foods know that if you don't have recipes, that if you can't track your ingredients, that if you don't know the diets, that you're completely sunk. And then media inquiries. We had a policy at Medical Command that we responded to media inquiries within 24 hours. So what that meant was if the Washington Post wants to run a story on something related to Army nutrition, I was the POC. Now, that was a lot of fun, and there was a lot of risk, because what would happen is most of the reporters that you would talk to were very, very professional, and they would try to get it right. You never got to review the articles, though. They would go out on national media, and you can't review them. So you're always a little bit nervous about that. But what happens once they get out there is there are other media outlets that pick them up, and then they change them. And sometimes they'll even sign their name to them with the information picked from the original article. So long story short is then they say whatever they want to say. So one situation, I was being interviewed by a reporter, and they had read a study done by the Navy, or done by, it was on Marines, and it suggested that about a third of Marines engaged in unhealthy habits to make weight, like binge eating, using laxatives or diuretics or something like that. And he asked me to comment about the Army. And I said, I can't comment. The study was done on Marines. I can't comment on that study. We don't have the data. If there's a problem, we really don't know how big the problem is. And that got twisted around, and it was published correct in the first article. Second and third, it was even published in Russian, saying the Army had a problem and a third of soldiers were using diuretics and laxatives to make weight, and the Army weight control program was too severe. And I got calls from, well, first I got calls on my cell phone and my home phone from all the major networks. The nightly news, they were calling me wanting to do an interview, and that's not how we do it. You know, they're always recorded with a public affairs officer, and I didn't want those calls. But I also got a call from the Pentagon, you know, asking where I came up with my data, and, you know, I had no data. That's not what I said. Luckily, all of the conversations are taped, so you can go back to the original, but it doesn't matter. The damage is already done. And when you contact the media outlet, what they say is, our original article that we stand by is on the website. And you go and it's the good article. The others are spin-offs that they can't control either. So, very interesting. Okay, reflections. Long story short is, I was a good fit. This was a good fit for me. I really enjoyed the Army. I love the Army. My wife many times has said, I don't know what you would have done without the Army. You know, I don't know what you would have done. So it worked out well for me. It's not a good fit for everyone, but I would ask the students in here, if you know nothing about it and the health careers that are available, just take a look, because there are some programs that might fit with your career aspirations. And if you find some, medical recruiter. Family and career balance. Was I able to do that? I have 2 healthy kids that are doing well, excuse me. So I guess the bottom line is yes, but I will tell you that the policy with my wife is I'll be home when I get home, and that's just the way it is. I'll call, but sometimes if I can't call, I won't call. And if I have to deploy or go somewhere, I just have to do it. And we had an understanding that that was the organization I belonged to, and I never got any grief about that. You know, and lucky me, I really appreciate that. That says a lot about my wife, because it's sometimes it's tough, and then sometimes it's just wonderful. So you balance the good and the bad. But I would say, for the most part, in any profession where you really want to excel, career's probably going to come first, and you're going to have to balance the rest of it. And, you know, that may not fit with what we want to tell people, but my experience is, of the people I knew who really excelled, they put career first, but they also were masters at managing their home life, and it didn't mean that their kids couldn't excel either. I know some really good kids who grew up in some chaotic families where the parents were really working very hard. So it's doable. The diversity of experiences are far beyond what I could have ever imagined. I mean, I grew up in Kentucky. I didn't realize I'd be sitting in the American Embassy in Paris talking to the equivalent of the French National Security Council, you know, on issues that were classified. I had no idea. Would I go to National War College and get a master's in national security strategy? No, I had no way of knowing. So it was far beyond what I expected. I talked about structure and autonomy. I talked about competition, but the opportunity that comes with it. The last thing I just want to mention briefly, and this is an observation mainly of my friends and my peers, but I would say that fitness and health, you can be very, very fit, and which we were in the military, but it can also lead to poor health. And so balance is really important. And, you know, at one point I was belly aching about I had some injury, and my wife said, you know, you might be fit, but I'm the healthy one. And it really stuck with me, that if you want to be a healthy older person, and I'm talking to the students, you know, I look at people that are doing the equivalent of CrossFit and some of those activities, and guess what? You probably won't be doing that when you're my age. I'm 56. And if you are, you're genetically lucky, and it's very, very rare. So at your age, I did read one time that my generation has more arthritis than previous, all previous generations. And and don't get me wrong, I wouldn't do anything different. I had a lot of fun doing all those things I did, but if I could go back in time, I would probably adopt the moderate physical activity would be better for long term. I didn't really get that. Life after the Army. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. We have 2 new puppies. I'm going to raise my puppies. I'm going to go fishing with my son as much as I can. And being in Texas, I'm going to eat lots of barbecue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel Dilly. We have some time potentially for some questions and answers from Colonel Dilly, if you have some.
And I do have to say, if you need to leave, feel free. It doesn't hurt my feelings. When you talk about your personal life, you don't know if it's going to take 15 minutes or 15 hours. It's very hard to judge the time. And so if you need to leave, by all means. If you do have a couple of questions, I would be glad to entertain.
If you don't mind, I'll ask. There's new guidelines for dietitians coming, or they're out, I guess, for master's degree. If you could forecast how you think that's going to affect the profession, either within the military or without, and then potentially also moving on to the PhD as an option.
I think it will probably make our program less attractive to some people. I think a lot of, because ours is the master's after the bachelor's, but I think it's the right way to go, and that's why we did it. What we saw was we needed an advanced skill set to really practice at the level that we thought the patients deserved. So across the board, I really do think it's the way to go. PhD, maybe not. I tend to think of PhD as a research degree to a big part, and it wouldn't hurt to do research with clinical practice, but I don't think it's necessary. If we did go to a doctorate, I think a clinical doctorate or something like that might be adequate. But if I thought about it longer, I might have a different answer. But I 100% agree with the master's as the entry-level degree. And what we saw was the professions that had gone to master's or the doctorate, like the doctorate in physical therapy, it prepared much better clinicians. And that was the intent. When we did the Doctor of Science programs for the PAs, we had a lot of issues with, people saying, we don't want them running around our hospital calling themselves doctor. And you know what we said? We completely agree. I didn't call myself doctor. In some situations I would. The main reason was, and we asked the PAs not to identify themselves as doctor because it confused the patients. We were doing that not just to give them a credential, but to give them clinical skills, advanced clinical skills. And if they wanted to call themselves doctor in an educational environment, that was fine. But if it was an environment where it could potentially confuse the patients, especially in the beginning where it was new and a lot of people didn't understand it, then we asked them, just call yourself by your rank.
Yes, Dr. Molt. Oh, they need it for the...
George, this is maybe just asking for a little quick recap, but going from second lieutenant to colonel, or going from entry-level professional out of college to director, leader down the road, and you've hit on some of those, but just what are 2 or 3 maybe nuggets, roadmap that just needs to happen? It's not right place, right time. always. There might be some of that. But what are some of the things that as new professionals, these students can kind of keep in the back of their mind as take-home messages that I've got to work this through as I progress through my promotions, whether it's military or whether it's somewhere else?
The first thing I would say, dietitians we're a unique group. And I say that very positively. But we tend to be a little bit high-strung, perfectionist, and we, how can I say this nicely? We don't like to look stupid. We don't like to fail. But put yourself out there. If you're in an environment where you can learn a different task, maybe it is facility design. Don't be afraid to jump in there and say, you know, I'm no expert on facility. I had a little bit of this at K-State. I'm no expert, but I really would like to learn more about that. And people don't fault you for doing that. You know, and whether it's a disease that you don't know anything about, you know, ask the physicians if you're in a clinical environment. You know, I really don't know much about, I don't know. Somebody pick one. Say again? Okay. I don't know much about that, but I didn't really hear you, but we'll...
The Zika virus.
Oh, Zika. Oh, that's a good idea. A lot of physicians won't know a lot about that either because it's so new. It's not their fault. I mean, the guidance is being developed, you know, but that's a very good idea. I don't know much about that, and your internal medicine doc in your hospital is giving a presentation on Zika virus. Seek them out. Don't be afraid to put your hand out and say, hi, I'm George. Glad to meet you. I would really like to learn more about that. You know, you can make so many friends. And let me just give you an example. In the hospitals, from the time you're a second lieutenant, not in the training programs, but we had to perform a duty called Administrative Officer of the Day, where you were the person who sleeps in the hospital, and not clinical issues that come up, but organizational issues that come up, you have to solve. And then you have to report back to the deputy commander of the hospital the next morning, have to prepare a report. And some of the hospitals I was in, there were as few as like 14 people on the roster. So it would come up, you know, once or twice every week or two. You had a sleep room, and you could sleep. But some people would come in, you know, you get to this book with all these instructions for all kinds of things that happen, and you look at the book. They would come in and put the book away, go in, turn on the TV, prop their feet up, go to sleep. I would always go in and see the ER staff, go to the emergency room, because we're right by the emergency room. Hey, I'm George. You know, it's probably Lieutenant Dilly at the time, or Captain. I'm in the sleep room. If anything comes up, you need any help, you let me know. And you make friends with them, and if they respect you, they're not going to give you a bunch of ash and trash stuff that, you know, they could do themselves, but they just don't want to. They'll really call on you when they need you. So sometimes it was like, Captain Dilly, we've got a family member in here that's distraught and causing a ruckus in the ER. We need for you to come out, either calm them down or call the military police. And so you go out there and you say, okay. You meet with them, you take them aside, you try to calm them down, you know, and if they can calm down, you know, you ask them, they can stay, fine, or they can leave. They're distraught because they have a family member that's sick or hurt, or there's a reason for it. And that was a great skill set to have, you know, and then they call on you. You know, one time a guy came in with a weapon and was threatening to shoot somebody. Now, they called the MPs, but they also called me too. So, you know, it got all sorted out. But instead of looking at this as a chore, you look at it as an opportunity to learn. And then I would go in, and the deputy commander happened to be my second line supervisor. So you know, at the time we wrote our reports, I would always write legibly so he could read it. I mean, it'd be nothing worse than giving him a report and he'd look at it and go, I can't read this. You know, okay, that's not going to work. So there were just little things, but even in the book, it told you needed to go out on the hospital grounds and pick up trash. Well, some of my peers would say, I'm not doing that. I didn't go to school to pick up trash. You know, I'm not doing it. I don't care if it says do it or not. I would just do it. And sometimes I would go in and see my second line supervisor the next day and say, George, did you pick up the trash out there? When I left, it was looking kind of bad. And it's just a few things. It may have taken 20 minutes. You know, besides that, sometimes you want to get out of the hospital. It's a nice day. You just walk around the outside and pick up the trash. And little things like that really mattered. And so try to look for opportunities, you know, and if your default is to say, I don't want to do that, catch yourself. You know, there's a phrase from one of the Star Wars that I really try to live by, and it's don't let your thoughts deceive you. You know, frequently we're our worst enemy when it comes to not seeing opportunity. You know, don't let your thoughts, my thought was, I don't want to do that. Well, maybe all of my thoughts aren't right. You know, maybe every now and then I'm tired and I think something that's not really in my best interest. You know, so does that sort of answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's continue this at the reception, but, however, we have, on behalf of the department, we have a gift we would like to offer in appreciation for your experiences you've shared with us today.
Thank you.
And so we'll have a reception over at Justin Hall, and...
Do I open it now?
Yeah, please do.
It's like Christmas. Oh, thank you.
A little picture for to remember the Flint Hills by.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Dr. Shanklin and I took a tour, and it sure was beautiful today.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give one more round of applause.
Thanks.